What's going on, everybody? C4 here today. Continue with the 7-round mock draft series. We're all hot and heavy. We're on a goddamn roll right now. We're continuing today with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We're going to look at their free agency, take a trip down memory lane, their 2016 draft, see kind of where the front office likes to go with things, and then take my hand at giving them a full 7-round mock draft. And again, another draft. So there's very few drafts. I think there's probably like 2 or 3 out of every team that I'm not really a huge fan of. The Bucs one's is one of the few that I am very satisfied with. I think if you're a Bucs fan, stopping by, you will enjoy the mock draft that I'm going to put forth here as the best mock drafts that you're going to find here on YouTube. So with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 9-7 last season. They had the 18th overall offense and the 23rd ranked defense. Their MVP just so happens to be my favorite wide receiver in the NFL, and his name is Mike Evans. Mike Evans, complete game changer. There was the stigma for a little bit that he had drop problems, but really established himself as, obviously he's not going to be a guy that's highly touted for his excellent hands, but certainly, the drops came down a bit, and he's maybe the best jump ball specialist, along with Alshon Jeffrey, in the NFL today. Mike Evans, big-time playmaking wide receiver, got unbelievable amount of targets. The fact that he was able to have his production when he was pretty much the only guy that Jameis Winston liked to throw the ball to is pretty remarkable, in my opinion. So there needs to be 4 free agency started. I added as defensive line, wide receiver, offensive tackle, running back, and safety. Their free agency moves is they released Alteron Verner, which freed up $6.5 million in cap. I'm giving that an A. He was just, kind of out of place there. Don't necessarily think he was a scheme fit for what they're, the post-Lovie Smith Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but I think Verner's still a decent corner, just nowhere near the cap hit after he, kind of cashed out with the Titans and went to the Tampa Bay Bucs in free agency. They franchise tendered Cameron Brate and Adam Humphries. Both those guys are very dynamic to the offense, and they're looking to build, so that's an A. They re-signed William Golston to a 5-year, $27.5 million deal, giving that a D+. I do not see where they see the value in this one. I'm not necessarily, this is like one of those, it's only really a 1-year deal. But Golston, he's nothing special, and that's pretty decent money right there. They re-signed Jaquiz Rogers to a 2-year, $3.3 million deal. I'll give him that an A-, man. Jaquiz Rogers, for me personally, I picked him up as a waiver wire flyer in fantasy football, which made me really want to watch him perform. When the Eagles weren't playing, the Bucs were on. He looked really fucking good, to be completely honest with you. He looked better than Doug Martin did behind that offensive line last year. And I personally think if I'm the Bucs and we don't get a stud running back early, I think I'm content with Jaquiz Rogers. There's durability concerns, but when he's healthy, he looked good. He was good. He's a 100-yard back behind what is a serviceable, at best, offensive line in Tampa Bay. Then to the free agency moves, they signed Deshaun Jackson on a 3-year, $33.5 million deal. Great player, great fit. Not a huge fan of the contract. We got to pay, a prima donna diva like Deshaun Jackson big money, especially to go to a market like Tampa Bay. But he is an excellent fit for that offense, and really is a yin to the yang with Mike Evans. And maybe we could see Jameis Winston actually take another step in his career with this move. They brought in Chris Baker, 3 years, $15 million deal. We all know how I feel about Chris Baker. He's a solid player though, trying to take this with an unbiased approach. I'll give it a C+, good fit for that defense. They got J.J. Wilcox on a 2-year, $6 million deal. I'm giving it a C+. He was a big-time thumper, big playmaking safety, pretty much cover for Bradley McDougall. I think that's, decent signing. And they signed Josh Robinson on a 2-year, $6.5 million deal. I know he's more a special teamer than anything, but he's not a elite special teamer, so I'm giving that a D+. That's a lot of money for a guy that's never really going to bring you much in the secondary. So look at their 2016 draft. How did they do? Was I a big fan? Did I hate it? Overall, after the second, if we got rid of if you just look at their first 2 picks, I liked it. If you look at everything else, yeah, not great. So the first round, they went Vernon Hargreaves III, who's from my favorite university, Florida, and he was really good last year. I think there were some learning curves, but for the most part, Vernon Hargreaves was one of the top corners. Who went ahead of him? Eli Apple went ahead of him. He was better than Eli Apple last year. 76 tackles, 9 pass deflections, and a pick. I think he's only going to continue to develop and get better there. You got Noah Spence with pick 39 in the second round. Another guy, a lot of upside. There's some off-field issues, but he got 5.5 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, 22 tackles, and looks like he's ready to totally earn that right to be a starter. And then after that, they went downhill by taking a kicker in the second round who was the worst kicker in the league last year. They got Ryan Smith, a corner from NC Central. What did that guy do? Did he do much? He's a special teamer? Yeah, I don't know. Caleb Benich, the offensive tackle from UCLA. I actually thought that was a decent depth pick. They got Devontae Bond and Dan Vitale, the superback from Northwestern, in the 6th round to finish out the draft. So really after the Noah Spence pick, it was a bunch of shit, to be completely honest with you, unless, oh my God, Devontae Bond, he's a beast. Unless I'm not seeing something, which for sure, Buck fans. I'm an Eagle fan. I don't watch, know all the depth guys. Maybe there's some more upside, but I really think Vernon Hargreaves and Noah Spence are pretty much it in terms of the 2016 draft class, but they are big-time playmakers with bright futures ahead of them, so you can't really give them a terrible draft because they might have a starting corner one and a starting defensive end one with their first 2 picks, so they did well there. So yeah, I think last year's draft for the Bucks, not bad at all. So now let's see, with my 7-round mock draft, can I continue to improve an up-and-coming team like the Tampa Bay Bucks? Let's see what we can do. So with their first-round pick 19, this guy here is one of the more polarizing players in the draft because either you're going to think he slipped a lot, or there's going to be the other side that think like this is probably where he should go. Doesn't really test well, but his tape was very good. He's uber productive. And that's Derek Barnett, the defensive end from Tennessee. 6'3", 260 pounds, 4'8", 40, 6'9", 6'3" cone drill. He did say he had injuries, and then at his pro day, he said he had another injury. I made a tweet. It reminds me of Tito Ortiz, because every time Tito Ortiz had a fight in the UFC, he'd always be like, oh, yeah, it was a good victory, but I had this wrong with me, or I had that wrong with me. Maybe it's just because I like to pick fun of him because he's from Tennessee. He's volunteers. Even though the greatest player in the history of football, Reggie White, is from the University of Tennessee, and Barnett broke his records. But I think Barnett is exactly the kind of edge rush they need. This is all just like all my moves go with the fact that I hate the William Golston signing. I don't think William Golston should start. I think you can pretty much get what you can get out of Robert Ayers before Father Time catch up. You got Noah Spence, and then you can put Derek Barnett on the other starting side. So their front four right now is William Golston, Gerald McCoy, Chris Baker, and Robert Ayers. In my opinion, if I'm the Bucks, my front four would be Derek Barnett, Gerald McCoy, Chris Baker, and Noah Spence. I think that personally has youth. It has the experience in the interior of a Chris Baker and Gerald McCoy. And then you got the 2 young edge rushers. Get them going right now. Get them firing all cylinders and have one of the best 1-2 punches on the edge. Because they need to get to the quarterback. They did not get a whole lot of sacks last season. And getting a guy like Derek Barnett, who's, like I said, not going to test well, not going to be a flashy athlete, freak athlete like, Jadeveon Clown. He just springs up, Khalil Mack type player. He's not that. He's a guy that uses more technique than anything. And, very productive. I think the one fact I have to give it up to him is that he produces against SEC teams. He would come out and play. The better the team was, the better he would play. When guys like Myles Garrett might not necessarily have, Myles Garrett's the kind of guy that would pad his stats against terrible teams. Like anytime Texas A&M played like a Div 2 school or someone that wasn't in the SEC, but that's where Myles Garrett would get 3-4 sacks. But Barnett, he'd get, consistently double-digit sacks against some of the top offensive linemen, guys that you'll be seeing in the NFL. I think he is a very solid prospect, but I do, because of his athletic limitations, feel like, he should be a top 20 pick, but people are saying, like, oh, Barnett should go top 10. You're just a biased. That's a little bit biased there, but he is going to be a great playmaker and will be a phenomenal pickup here for the Tampa Bay Bucks. Jumping to the second round, pick number 50, I had them staying with Florida State. Pairing with Jameis Winston, and that's Roderick Johnson, the offensive tackle from Florida State, 6'7", 300 pounds. This man is a right tackle, can play left tackle. I think he can play it all, to be completely honest with you. Played left tackle with Florida State. Again, that's just the generic. If you play left tackle in college, unless you're a once in a lifetime prospect, more often than not, guys will get slated right on the right tackle side. But Donovan Smith was terrible last year. I think DeMar Dodson is a very serviceable right tackle, and I think personally, if I'm the Bucks, I'll be seeing if Roderick Johnson can be our starter here at the left tackle spot, because Donovan Smith was an absolute turnstile last season. I remember I watched the 2 games that Bucks had primetime. Horrible. He got beat like every single play, really hanging out Jameis Winston to dry. And I think 100% Roderick Johnson, obviously they might have ties. Maybe Jameis Winston's trying to do some scouting and recruiting for his team. Like, hey, go get my buddy from Florida State. But I think Roderick Johnson, right tackle, left tackle, I think he has flexibility to play both tackle spots. Might need to bulk up a little bit to really be a franchise left tackle. And that's, kind of, I don't want to slap that tag like, oh, C4 said Roderick Johnson can be a franchise left tackle. But I think in terms of the tackle position, which, even DeMar Dodson, man, he's getting up there in age a little bit. He's starting to slow down, and there's no real tackle depth on that team. I think you go best tackle available here in the second round, and that's Roderick Johnson, which is a good pick for the Bucks, and he knows he may end up being a starter there. Jumping to the third round, staying on the offensive line at the center spot, I have them going Pat Elflein, center from Ohio State, 6'3", 305 pounds, put up 22 reps on the bench press, 5'3", 240. Just very solid. NFL Pro comparison, they gave it Travis Frederick of the Dallas Cowboys. I think they're different type players. I think Frederick is a lot more stout, whereas Elflein is more technique than anything. But again, Joe Howley, not terrible, but definitely not, the answer. Definitely not a guy I would be Really comfortable being my future center. He got beat. He seemed like every game I watched the Bucks play. I think I watched 2 or 3 Bucks games. He was always hurt. He was always on the field. Something's wrong with him. I think you go young here at center, get tremendous value in Pat Elflein, who's debatably the second best center in this year's draft class, or maybe even the best center, depending on where you have him and Ethan Posich. Again, just continue to build that offensive line. That's what you need to do. You don't want Tampa Bay to end up being a similar situation to what the Colts were a couple years ago, where you had Andrew Luck, you had your franchise quarterback, you have your wide receivers now with Deshaun Jackson, Mike Evans, and Adam Humphries, but then your offensive line, I mean, you got Ali Marpet's good, J.R. Sweezy's solid, and DeMar Dotson's solid, but there's not a lot of depth there. If 1-2 guys go down, which always happens, offensive linemen are always getting hurt. I mean, that offensive line can be exposed. So I think this year, where they're picking, how my board went when I was doing the full 32-team mock drafts, I think it's best here. I think in rounds 2 and 3 to shore up and get that offensive line set. And Elflein and Roger Johnson in the previous round do that for me. Jumping to the 4th round, I'm going with an offensive playmaker, Carlos Henderson, the wide receiver from LA Tech, 5'11", 200 pounds, 4.46 40, 13 reps on the bench press. And little known fact, he made the most people miss tackles last season at LA Tech. I think he's a dynamic playmaker with the ball in his hands. And this is more so, as much as Buck fans don't want to hear it, Deshaun Jackson is a Band-Aid. I think Deshaun Jackson is, obviously there's still some positive, negative things, me being this Eagles fan. I'm not really salty. I'm glad that he's out of the division. And Bucks are a team, I don't want to see the Bucks do terrible, even though they robbed the Eagles one year. We were supposed to go to the Super Bowl. But the Bucks, like I said, Mike Evans, I like Mike Evans. I like Gerald McCoy. I like Quan Alexander. I like Levante David. I like Vernon Hargreaves. I like more people than I hate on the Bucks. So I'm saying that, not trying to come up biased or pissed off. But Deshaun Jackson is not a long term. He's 30. He's a speedster. His father time is going to catch up to him. I wouldn't be surprised to see Deshaun Jackson take a slight step back every year gradually. You've seen it there in Washington. His durability is starting to go down a little bit, and his speed's going to go. Unless he's Jimmy Smith, he's not going to have his speed forever. And then once that starts to go, he's still a good playmaker, but he's not the future there. And looking behind Mike Evans, you got Adam Humphries, who's forever going to be a slot guy. So then who else do you have as a dynamic playmaker? It's not going to be Josh Huff. I think a guy like Carlos Henderson is, getting him in the 4th round, pick 125. That's tremendous value, because if this was a weaker draft class or a weaker defensive side where we're, a lot more better offensive prospects, I think Carlos Henderson could be, this 4th round's a steal. I think Carlos Henderson, playmaking ability-wise, what he can do with the ball in his hands, special teams, he's a returner, he can do everything. I think Carlos Henderson would be a phenomenal depth piece and would get immediately involved in that offense. He'd be the 4th best wide receiver, in my opinion, on that team. And that's a team there that's going to be looking to air the ball up more often than not, especially with the uncertainty about Doug Martin. They may be a team that, will be a little bit imbalanced on the offensive side of the ball and try to pass the ball and compensate with that. And I think, the more weapons, the better, and Carlos Henderson would be a nice pairing to slide in right next to Adam Humphries in the depth chart. Going to the 5th round, speaking of running backs, I'm going with my favorite sleeper running back in this year's draft class. And pick 162, I have them going Jerry McNichols, the running back from Boise State, 5'9", 215 pounds, 4.49 40, had a 6.933 cone drill. Pro comparison for him on NFL.com is Devontae Booker. But, I mean, look at McNichols' tape. He can do it all. You want a guy that can catch? Done. You want a guy that can run between the tackles? Done. You want a guy that's explosive? Done. You want a guy that doesn't fumble? Done. A lot of people from Boise State, I was actually talking to a couple friends of mine that are Boise State fans. They said he's better than Jay Ajayi. And we all know what Jay Ajayi did with the Miami Dolphins. I think a guy like Jerry McNichols in the 5th round is an absolute steal. And he'd come in. Right now, obviously, you got Jaquiz Rogers and Charles Sims, but it does not look like Doug Martin really has a future there. It looks like with the off-the-field issues, and he's getting paid big money. They're probably going to try to find a way out of that contract, more often than not, which means you need to, I think they're just going to have a stable of running backs there in Tampa Bay. I think getting a guy like Jerry McNichols in the 5th round is good. I think, Jaquiz Rogers not getting paid big-time money. He's a depth role guy that can contribute as a starter. So get a guy like Jerry McNichols. Get a guy that has the potential to really carve out a role. Get a Boise State running back to replace a Boise State running back potentially. You got Charles Sims there, but you don't have that guy that can run between the tackles. I think that's what Jerry McNichols can bring to that offense. Not a smash and dash combination by any means. It's not like you're adding a power back to that scheme, which is just maybe what Buck fans would want. But he's my best running back available, and I think he's going to be an absolute sleeper this year. Jump to the 6th round, pick 204, getting a backup quarterback with the loss of Mike Glennon. I think the Bucs truly do value a solid backup quarterback. So now I got to go with the most polarizing. Is this guy going to be a project? I personally think he sucks, to be honest with you. But there are the traits. There are just the people that want to label him as the next Dak Prescott. And he could be. I don't want to come and be the guy that said, oh, Josh Dobbs is never going to make it. He sucks. And then watch him do great things and really, put my foot in my mouth. But he needs a lot of work. I guess the potential, the framework is there. I don't see it, but I'm not going to doubt him. And that's Joshua Dobbs, pick 204, the quarterback from Tennessee, 6'3", 215 pounds, 4'6", 440, tested very, very well. I just don't see the accuracy. He is very, very, very inaccurate, very hot and cold. To the kind of guy, I think he might be the biggest project quarterback with upside. I was not impressed with. He'd have for every good game he'd have with Tennessee, he'd have 4 games where he was terrible. Couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. There were certain games where Tennessee wide receivers would kind of fail him a little bit. But I mean, against Florida in particular, obviously he had one big game and then he had one bad game, which is pretty much the way that I've seen for the limited. I don't know, I've probably seen 5 or 6 Tennessee games last year. It just seemed like one game he'd be good, one game he'd be... When he's good, he looks solid. He doesn't look great or phenomenal when he plays good. When he plays bad, he looks like one of the worst quarterbacks in the SEC, let alone college. So I do think that there is upside there. But, obviously with Jameis Winston, you don't necessarily have to have immediate cover because he is your franchise guy. So I think a guy like Joshua Dobbs, that'd be a very favorable situation for him to go into. And there's upside there. So there you go for number 6. And then 7th round at pick 237, I'm going just with linebacker depth, and that's Richie Brown, the linebacker from Mississippi State, 6'2", 235 pounds. Just a solid depth guy, good tackler. I think looking at the depth right now, you got Darius Glanton, Devontae Budd, Jeff Knox. At least Richie Brown was a tackle machine for Mississippi State. Very smart guy, typical white linebacker traits. He's pretty much he's like a Ben Ballware, not as popular, but same type of player. Could be able to make the team as a special teamer, but just a solid depth guy with really, really good heart. Jim Rant throwing in all those superlatives that they give to white players, but he's good. He's just the only thing is the athletic ability. But if you want a guy that's technique and he's solid cover talent, he might make a team for special teams, and that's what you pretty much can hope for in the 7th round. So there you go, guys. That is my 7th round Tampa Bay Buccaneers mock draft. Let me know what you think about it in the comment section below. If you're the first time stopping by, don't be afraid to subscribe to the channel. 100 likes on this video, guys, and we'll be doing, I think, the Denver Broncos are up next. So until next time, it's C4 saying peace out.